Namaste. Welcome. My name's Keith. This is a therapeutic practice, and for it you'll need a block, a blanket, and a bolster. You can also fake those with lots of other things. Bolsters can be made out of a couple of blankets or some beach towels, a towel for a blanket, a couple of books for a block. This practice will be a play of yin and yang, so experiencing a couple of shapes, first with support and props, and then with fewer or maybe no props at all. Seeing what we learn from those passive places and what we can take into the more active spaces. Let's get started.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama.
Start by sitting on your heels. Leave a little space between you and your blanket, and create a thick enough blanket that it'll be a nice cushion for your head to rest on. Have your block handy, and at first you might take your knees open a little bit so that there's a little bit more room in your hips on the way down, but you're essentially moving into a child's pose. And then begin to thread your left arm down across the mat so that your head can come to rest on your blanket, and your right hand is going to rest on the block. Make little adjustments so you don't feel crowded in your setup. Wiggle around and find the weight and the depth that feels best for you. And then once you get there, you can extend your right arm with the block. And it might be that your hand is on the middle height with the block there. Flat is great. You might even go up to the taller height after a few breaths. But you're looking for room where you can actually see underneath your own arm. They're like threading the needle, but in child's pose. If it feels like having your arm directly alongside your ear, or sending your arm directly out of your shoulder and onto the mat crowds your shoulder, you can always move the block a little bit off the mat, so it just opens up the space between your arm and your ear, between your shoulder and your ear. So there's a lot of room to work with. And then as it gets more familiar, wiggle a little bit through your left waist and allow yourself to sink a little bit deeper. All the while, see if you can feel pretty heavy on both sides of your pelvis so that both hips feel like they're meeting a heel bone or some heel padding. The nice thing about the blanket, not only as a head cushion, but it keeps you from collapsing all of your weight into your shoulder. If you took the block off your mat, see what it's like to bring it back on. Careful with letting your elbows sag there, so really extend. Even though it's a quiet shape and it's a restful idea, keep some action going through your arm. And as you settle in, commit to a full deep breath. Everything that we do in this practice is going to have a supported version and then an unsupported version, or a slightly more relaxed and maybe even passive experience next to a more active experience. Even in these quieter moments, the shape never goes dead. It's never a point to check out. But instead, we're using the contrast to see if we can experience the subtleties that sometimes we miss in a more active shape. Things that we kind of blur the lines of alignment on, or just try to get through. Give yourself a few more breaths here on this first side. And then because you're so twisted up and because your arm is supported, start by bending a little bit at your right elbow and pulling the block down so it comes down toward you, just to get your hand off of it. And then as your elbow gets heavy, you can press down into your right hand against the blanket, unravel, shift your block over to the other side, pause for a moment, and then you can begin to thread your right arm through. So aim your shoulder toward the ground. Aim to rest the side of your skull, somewhere on the temporal bone, on the blanket. Move around as you get acquainted with the twist initially, and then find your block. And you can extend your arm. You might start with your hand and block off the mat. And then as you get more acquainted and more comfortable, the block might make its way onto your mat so that you can gaze underneath your left arm without having to use any muscle in your neck. A lot of times when we thread the needle, it feels like there's action in the muscles of your neck, which is totally okay. But see if here you can enjoy the opposite. So you have this opportunity to peek under, to see differently, and have a different awareness of a familiar shape. You can bring your block up higher and extend more through your reach so that you experience a lot of length through your entire side body, all the way up into your lats. And the two sides are rarely the same, so don't really expect them to be. Work with them and fidget and experiment until you find the place where you can really be in the twist and experience some quiet. Do notice if you tend to shift off center with your pelvis and see if you can stay heavy there. Slow down through your inhale so you really get this experience of expanding your rib cage. And notice what you want to change when you exhale, or what wants to shift, where you might collapse. And keep the shape lively even through the letting go of your breath out. Give it just a moment more here. And then begin to soften at your elbow. Roll down the block so you can shift your arm. Plant your left hand and ease yourself up. Find the middle. And then transition onto all fours. Narrow your knees. Cross your legs. And you might sit up on your blanket when you cross your legs. Just so that your thighs can drop away easily, your knees can feel easy. Start by simply sitting, right? So remember, something supported and something unsupported, or something with props and something without props. So as you set up for this twist without props, take your left hand over to your right knee and drop your right fingers around behind you. And let that be it at first. Right? So you can really sit with the simplicity of changing how your shoulder blades work. So the moment I reach across, my shoulder blade moves away from my spine. And when I take my fingers behind me, especially if I keep my elbows soft, my shoulder blade will come closer to my spine. So let that be the initial setup. Use more energy and work with your right fingers tenting behind you than you do with your left hand reaching across. And then you can press through your right fingers and wing your shoulder blade and your elbow toward your spine to take you deeper into the twist. So there's some effort. Notice where you want to take your gaze. And just let your gaze turn with your shoulders. So there's no extra tension in your neck, just like when you were lying on the floor. So take that information of no tension and bring it into this seated, more active version of the twist. So there's more action through your arms and still no action through your neck muscles. No action might be strong, but no overexertion of the muscles in your neck. There's some action in your muscles until the day that you die. And you're not dead yet. But see how you can be here in this twist without overdoing it. Just like being on the floor, you can release a little bit and then come back into it. So if you tend to lock up, even when you don't know you're doing it, if that's your tendency, you can undo it for a moment. Good, and then release and come back to center. And pause for a moment just so you feel the middle. And then you can take your twist the other way. So taking your right hand over and tenting your left fingers behind you. And start with just that kind of simplicity. When you breathe in, see if you can experience more space across your chest. So there's a real uplift to your breastbone. And then remember, it's your left fingers pressing behind you as you wing your elbow and your shoulder a little closer to your spine. So rather than trying to flatten your hand or lock your elbow, keep some softness back there. And then you can take the twist a little bit further from your left fingers, pressing into the ground. And your gaze can follow along. Notice when you want to add tension to your neck or look further than you need to. Stay here for another moment. Feel free to undo and redo. Just so it never feels static, never feels stuck. You always have some permission to adjust and shift and refine the experience. And then slowly come back to the middle. Pause with your hands on your knees. And just experience your spine. Experience what you benefited from the twist. You'll need your block for the next shape. You won't need your blanket or your bolster. Start with the block just off to the side. And set yourself up first on all fours, just to line up your hips over your knees. And then once you've got that, change it to being down on your elbows and your knees. So you have sphinx in your arms, and you've got sort of an all fours in your legs. And right away, pay attention to where you want to sink in your belly and start to do some sort of back bend. So use this to press down into the ground to feel some extra action across your upper back and to pull your navel into your spine. So just getting the experience of integrating your front and back bodies together while you're here on your elbows. And this might be the shape that you need to spend more time with, right? You can always stay longer, pause what's going on with the video, and then come back to the next thing and work where you need to work. But even though it's a static shape, just like that threading the needle, you want to make sure that you're not sinking in your arms when you stop paying attention, right? So that there's this constant awareness of how much space you're making across your upper back, how you're really meeting the ground. And the same goes for what the tops of your feet are doing. A lot of times when you're here, it's harder to feel the connection with the ground through your legs. So you might end up curling your toes if that helps you stay aware of what your feet are doing so that you know that they're not floating up off the ground. And then once you've got that established, you can bring your block in, and if you set it in between your forearms on its flat level, that should be a good spot to bring your forehead down to it. And once your forehead is down, extend one arm and then the other. And you'll notice right away that you probably want it to sink. Right? So draw up and fill up your back body again. You're not pressing your forehead down, but you're pressing through the thumb mound of your hands, which will definitely take more of the weight that you do feel on your head toward your hairline and less toward your brow line. Keep drawing in through your belly until the shape just got more active. Once you take the forearms off the ground and you only have your hands and your lower legs to work with, and you're asking yourself to draw up and in, then there's action. So this supported puppy pose, precursor to downward facing dog, can really have some life. And you can ask yourself, while you're in a shape like this, is this the kind of action that your down dog has when you practice it? I think most of the time, most of us would answer absolutely not. But think about what you could bring to your downward facing dog if you brought this kind of action to it. Taking away the idea that it's a resting pose, that it's a hangout place, and really seeing what's going on with this pose in moments like this make us understand how it can be seen as an arm balance or an inversion, one that you come back to over and over throughout your practice. And then once you've been here with the block for a little while, you can use one hand, take the block out, just move it up to the front, line up your thumbs again, and then have that same kind of connection to the ground now with your hairline. Absolutely not collapsing, drawing in with your front body. If ever you get any tingling in your arms or any strain in your shoulders, definitely come back to one of the previous versions, but keep powering up your reach and allow yourself to feel alive. Let the shape feel alive. It doesn't have to feel static, right? So there's room to wiggle, there's room to adjust, there's room to modify where things are. Press stronger through the tops of your feet. Continually checking in with all of your connections, all the connections to the ground, all your connections to yourself, your front and your back body. Just a couple more breaths here. And then let one hand slide back in line with your face. Soften through your second elbow. Slide that hand back, coming on to all fours. And pause here. And then have a seat back on your heels, finishing where you started. Bring in your blanket along with your block for the next shape. So my blanket hasn't changed from the thickness that I used when I was doing that child's pose, thread the needle. So I'm going to use that same thickness and come on up to stand. I'm going to lay that so it's across my body, right across my pelvis. Make sure your feet don't go any wider than your hips. Let your belly fold over the blanket so you can really clamp your ribs onto it. Set your block so it's somewhere in the neighborhood in front of your toes. Definitely bend your knees some so you feel more connection between your ribs, the blanket, and your thighs. And then begin to fold over here. And the blanket helps create this sense of what is it like for your ribs to meet something when you're doing a shape like Uttanasana. So that you can set that in your mind and you can have that in your body's memory when you take the shape without a prop. As you get more room through your spine and it releases and you have more room moving down your legs, you can use your block to stack your forearms. And they can stack one in front of the other so that as you hang your head between your arms, you can allow your head to get heavier toward your forearms. And there might even be a little connection there. As you do that, feel how the weight shifts toward the front side of your foot and comes out of your heel a little bit. Watch out for any kind of shoulder scrunching up by your ears, but really allow your spine to pour into your neck to pour into your head, and length to go down your legs. You can always keep some bend. You could always have a second block. But setting up this sensation of an empty belly cavity and your ribs to your thighs and a long thoracic and cervical spine. If you tend to hyperextend, if you tend to force, if you tend to round, make sure that you keep some bend in your knees. Let your exhale come out of your mouth. Notice when you do bend your knees a little bit, how much more your ribs will meet the blanket. Creates a stronger clamp from the thigh side of the shape. You're not actually folding anymore with your ribs, but because your thighs come into the blanket when you bend your knees, it creates a sensation that then frees up some room in your back and allows you to fold. You can keep the elbow grab. You might see if your hands are willing to come down to the mat. Notice that you might have lost some of the weight in the ball mound of your foot, and you can shift forward again. Doesn't matter if anything's meeting the block now. Right now the block is just for your forearms, so if you've brought your hands down, you don't worry about the block. Give yourself a couple more exhales. Even here with my hands on the floor, watch out for your shoulders at your ears. Good. And then definitely bend your knees. Tip to your fingers if you're or if you're down on your palms. And then let the blanket slide out. You can keep the block where it is, and then resume the forward bend. So if your hands came down to the ground, you can let them start there. Some softness in your elbows and some softness in your knees. So that as you pour your ribs into your thighs, look how much bend I'm using in my knees here. You can use that, make that connection, and then keep some of that as your head drops and the weight shifts into the ball mound of your foot a little bit. And you can keep your hands down on the floor, or you can move your forearms behind your calves. And the thing that I'm watching out for is putting all of my weight into my head. The goal is not to get your head down on something, because if I'm only shifting weight into my head, then I'm going to end up scrunching and compressing through my neck. So if I make this contact, awesome. If this contact feels impossible to make, just forget about it. The contact that's important is the contact I'm making with my ribs to my thighs, which means that my belly had to move in, and I get this deeper lengthening through my whole back. So whether I've got my hands around my calves or my palms to the floor, it's nice for sure to have my head on something to give myself a sense of releasing. But I want to make sure that if my hands are behind my legs, that my shoulders are easy. If my hands are on the floor, that my shoulders are easy, because that's going to give my neck some release too, whether or not my head is touching the block. Just a couple more exhales here. And then some bend in your knees. You can roll to the tips of your fingers and open your chest. Move your hands forward a little bit, shift your block out of the way. And then you can ease down to your knees. Have a seat on your heels. Pause there and just let your blood flow change so you don't get a head rush. And let everything sink into the ground. Bring in your bolster now so you can use all three props. You're going to use the bolster for a side-lying pose. Usually with side-lying poses, you want to try to make sure that you get your waist up onto whatever you're lying on so that your hip and your shoulder can float a little bit. It gives you a lot of lateral extension through your spine, opens up a lot of room without putting pressure on your hip or on your shoulder. In this particular version, let your hip rest on the ground. So I'm going to bring my right hip down to the floor and get as close as I can to the bolster. And then as I drape myself over it, I'll start to get more space through my left ribs. I'm going to take the blanket on top of my arms, so right around the elbow crease, so I don't feel like I'm doing anything funky to my shoulder. And you can make it as thick as you need to be able to rest your head on something, so your head doesn't just feel like it's draping or drooping. And then once I'm here, and I've got all this space through my left side and a shorter right side, use my block as a little prop to put my hand on. And I can even frame it with both hands so that I get some of what I was doing in my side-lying pose, opening my whole left side from my hip to my fingers, while getting this experience of extra space on one side and less space on the opposite. And that's going to be key when we take the props away and see what this shape feels like in a more active version. Watch out here for your shoulder creeping up into your ear or lots of weight dropping into your arm to the point where it feels like your arm is getting too heavy at the elbow joint. So because my right arm is here, I can use my open right palm and put the block into my hand. And that just takes my left arm up a notch. I can even encourage that with my right hand, just pressing up the block a little bit. So I get a lot more room through my left armpit there. If ever you get any tingling in your arm or pain around your shoulder, you can come out and take a break, rest your arm on your side. Really experience the fullness of your inhale moving into this extra space that you've created in your left waist. Just a couple more moments on this side. Good. Take one more breath. And then soften through your left arm. Just like before, you can roll the block down. Set it down. Use your left hand against your bolster. Ease yourself up to sit. And then reset everything for the other side. So that your left hip is now going to come onto the floor next to your bolster. Leave some room between the bolster and the blanket so that as you drape, if having your arm out long doesn't work, you can move your arm at more of an angle so that your shoulder is more cooperative, but choose where your shoulder is happy, where you've got room. Let your head come down. Make sure it feels supported. Notice when you want to roll toward the bolster with your belly or roll back on it toward your back, and really make sure you're on your side. And then you can use your right arm and reach with the block and extend, 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 extend. If you know you want to have your two palms holding it, you can set that right up. Opening up through your right side body. And you can see that my legs aren't stacked. They can scissor a little bit so that my right knee can be heavy behind my left calf. It's not so important what your legs are doing or not doing. It's all about what's happening here in your waist. Reaching alongside. If it was helpful, you can use your left fingers to encourage the block up a little bit. A little hydraulic lift. It's also fine if it's on the floor. And just like every other shape, the two sides will not feel like they are the same. So you don't have to necessarily do all the same things on every side. Listen to what your body is asking you and see if you can accommodate it. See if you can support it. See if you can aid it and give it what it needs. Just like all the other supported versions so far in this practice, it's not like there is no effort and no action happening here. It's just action targeted in a very specific place. So right now that action is targeted in your arm. so that you can continue what's happening in your waist from the support. The bolster gives you the opening, and then you grow out of that opening with some action in your arm. So it just means I'm not collapsing with my elbow, not collapsing with my shoulder, but I follow what my body is already doing. And I use that to fine-tune what my arm would do with no action, with no attention. Remember, if there's any tingling in your fingers or through your arm, just release what your right arm is doing. Take a break, and you might come back into it. I always love a good side-lying pose to open up through my waist. Never really notice a tightness or a tension in that part of my body until I do a shape like this and open up through my body. And I think, oh, that's what I've been missing. Give it another moment here. And soften through your right elbow, roll down the block. Use your right hand against the bolster as you sit yourself up. And then the bolster can move away. Keep your blanket and keep your block. And now you're going to use the blanket on top of your right thigh. So if I stand up, and I'll mirror image you for this, and I put the blanket over my right thigh, so I can stand on my left knee and kind of smush it down. And the way that you had to go up and over on the bolster, you'll do that here. So there's a sense of leaning, lifting up through your waist, and tilting so that your hand can come down to the floor. And that might be where your block comes back in if you want to rest your hand on the block. Right? So getting that same sense of openness and shortness. So openness on the top and a shortness on the bottom. So that happens when there's nothing there through contraction and through action. And you have to contract to get up and over this blanket a little bit. Right? And then your top arm can reach so that your left arm can reach up and over. And remembering not to drop in, also remembering not to collapse down, right? So if I use some small amount of action through my right hand and not collapse, I know that my right shoulder is going to stay away from my ear. I'm not going to lock up through that side of my body, and then I can reach. So I'm getting this modified version of side angle. So I could certainly stay here, where I could kick under with my left toes and spin down my heel and then accentuate some of the lift through my side body. Right there, my arm wants to collapse, so lift it up and have a little rotation. Just like on the bolster, not rolling back, not rolling forward. Just one more moment here. And then you can look down, release your arm, drop your knee if it lifted, and then change that up to the other side. So now the blanket's going to lay over the top of your left thigh. Smush it down, create enough room so that between your hip point and your ribs, you can lift your ribs and go over the blanket. And then as you get there, you might decide that you want your hand to rest on the block so your left hand can come down onto it. Use your right hand and open up through your waist a little bit. And you could stay here with your hand on your waist, or you can begin to add your arm alongside your head, remembering it wants to drop into your field of view. So remember how your hand was stacked on the block when you were threading the needle? Use that here. Same thing with the side lying pose. Have that sense of something supporting your hand so you can float more space into your arm. And you can stay here with your knee on the ground, or you can lean into your left foot so you can curl under your right toes, and then spin down your heel. Continue draping over the blanket and feeling how it presses into your ribs to help create some of that space you're looking for. Your knee might want to drop over toward the big toe side of your foot, so just pay attention to that. Give yourself one more breath. And then slowly release it. And have a seat on both heels. And just settle in for a moment. Begin to move your blanket off your mat. Don't put it too far away. You might end up wanting to use it in just a moment, but we'll see. Bring your bolster back in and lay it down across your mat. Have a seat on the floor with your back to the bolster and have your block somewhere within reach. Recline back and try to keep your pelvis on the ground. You can put the block onto your belly as you're getting set up. And as you recline, see if you can take your pubic bone closer to your tailbone. So you're kind of scrubbing and wiggling your tailbone closer into the bolster as you go. So that when you initially start to lie back, you want to notice how your shoulders are no longer on the bolster. There's a little bit of your shoulder blade, but you're trying to get past the bolster with your shoulders. So if you have a shorter waist, you might change this to a blanket so that it's not as much ground to cover. And then my head gets down to the floor, and it's really the back of my skull toward the top of my head. I don't want it to just be the top of my head hanging. So you have a couple of options here. If your head really hangs, you could put the block underneath your skull so it hangs less. You could also fold a blanket into that space. But if your head comfortably drops back and it doesn't crunch up through your neck, then you can begin to use the block between your hands. Initially, extend your arms so you get more length through both sides of your waist. Hold the block between your palms so your thumbs can then point down to the mat. And then you might use your two thumbs, almost like two little kickstands, to make contact with the ground. At some point when it feels like you don't need that anymore, you can just let your thumbs hold the block underneath, and then the block can touch down. So you're getting this back bend with extra length through your upper body. So when you think about back bends, hopefully you think about length more than the extension. Because the more length you get, the more possibility you have in the extension. So I'm using the block to continue this idea of length. So I'm not just holding it, but I'm really reaching and extending, not to the point of locking or straining, but really sending it away from my hips to give a little bit of traction through my entire spine in the back bend. You might find if you lift your head for a moment, bring your chin toward your chest, and then let your head fall again, you might actually end up being a little bit more on the back side of your skull now. It's not dramatic, but it's not any more toward the top. Just giving your neck some more extension. And you can do that one more time. Little lift, more length through your arms, and then slowly bring it down so you're more on the back of your skull. Breathe with this for 5 more breaths. Hopefully the reaching also keeps the compression out of your low back. That and the fact that your knees are bent here, yeah? Just giving your hip creases a little bit more depth, more room to your lumbar, more extension through your upper spine all the way into your arms, but none of it feels compressed. So take one more breath, and then soften your elbows, let the block come in close to your head, and then bring it up and over. And then you can interlace your fingers behind your skull, draw your chin into your chest, and then begin to roll to your side to sit yourself up. And then once you're up, you can lay your block out of the way and come onto your knees. Right? So if your knees like some padding, you can use the blanket to pad your knees. Once you're on your knees, use your bolster and lay it across the back of your legs. So it really is on top of your heels and on top of your calves. It doesn't need to be touching the back of your thigh or against your hamstrings. You want to get it back there so it creates a little extra lift. And even standing here, press down and feel some of the length that you were setting up with your arms when you had the block, but let that come up through your side body. Not through your chin and not through your head, but really through your side waist. So once you've got that established, you can begin to take one hand back for the bolster and the other hand, so using your fingertips to tent against the bolster, and then lean some space into the front side of your pelvis. So you don't get into squeezing your butt, but roll your shoulders back, press down through your whole shin, and open up the front side of your body for Ustrasana. Once you're there, your palms might flatten a little bit, and your gaze can find some ceiling, or your head might drop back. Draw your chin in if your head went back. Press into your shins. Come back up to stand on your knees. Give yourself a moment. You're going to take that a second time just to see where it goes, right? So taking the support of the reclined version that you did, experiencing that space and that length, and then letting that translate into being here. So it might be that you start the same way with your fingers on the bolster, and let that be it. Opening up your front body, pressing through your shins. You might find that because you had that first Ustrasana, that your hands might walk further back and drape over the edge a little bit more. Opening up, and then maybe your head. Draw in and stand up. Good. And then the bolster's right there for you, so you can have a seat on it for a moment. Feel your heart beating after the back bend. Good. And then transition off the bolster. Lay it down. Have a seat. Sweep your feet off to one side. So you can come to sit on your bum. And then set it up so that your legs are long and wide. And then draw the bolster toward you and sit tall. So when you're sitting tall, hug the bolster into your front body. So one hand is high, one hand is low. And just focus on length. So after the back bend, find length to reinflate the intervertebral discs before you start to do anything that goes in the opposite direction, like a forward bend. So definitely sit here and bring some alertness to your spine so you can feel how the front edges of your sitting bones dig into the ground a little bit. There's a natural upsweep that feels like the back bend moving through your entire spine. And then imagine that this amount of length can stay with your spine when you start to bend forward. So stay here as long as you like, absolutely. Or you can begin to shift the bolster forward so it's more of a wedge, and then keep as much of this length through your spine as you bring your forehead to rest on the bolster. And then you can let your hands drop. So the tendency might be to round here a little bit, but see if you can maintain some of that length. It's not all going to stay, but maintain some of it as your head gets heavy into the bolster. Also notice what your feet want to do when they want to roll out or roll in. They don't have to be perfectly vertical, but allow yourself to keep as much neutral shape in your legs so that you're not going into a floppy foot one way or the other. And you'll notice that as your body releases into the shape, that you'll feel more pressure the way that your head is meeting the bolster, and that's a good indication that it's time to take the bolster down a notch. So it can still be on a wedge kind of shape, and then you keep as much of that length and space as you possibly can as you hinge forward again and let your forehead rest on the bolster at a different spot. And the moment that turns into rounding dramatically to get to something, then come back up. So if I got here and I felt myself round, I could have my hands on the bolster just to add one more notch of lift before coming down to this point. So the length is key. The length is key in the back bend, and the length is key in the forward bend. So you're never getting into too much crunching, too much forcing. And when your head starts to feel heavy here against the bolster, you can lower it down one more time. And it might be that your forehead comes down, or you can stack your forearms. And then rest your forehead on the bolster here. And you might notice that because you've taken all of this time to come forward with as much length in your spine as possible, that you might feel like you've got more room in your hamstrings. Giving your back time often gives your hamstrings more room, because if your back is fighting the forward bend, then your hamstrings will fight back. You can finish it off with your forehead down on the bolster and your elbows and forearms down on the mat if that works for you. There might be a little bit more sense of release through your upper back now, not holding as much openness across your chest. As long as that still means your shoulders are away from your ears. Last couple of breaths. Let your head stay heavy, but move your hands back. Press into the mat to come up. Take a moment there. And you can leave your bolster just like it is. Pull it more into the middle of your mat. And then come up to sit on top of it. If your block is in your way, you can move it off to the side. And then as you recline back on the bolster, you want to make sure that you're sitting far enough back that you can get your shoulders onto the ground. Press into your elbows to puff up some space. You can even readjust to feel like you're sliding your shoulder blades down your back. And then let your legs stretch out. And you can cactus your arms. So you have this variation on bridge. If you feel any tightness or compression in your back, you can drag one leg in so you feel your low back get a little bit flatter into the surface of the bolster, and then do that on the other side so it smooths down your sacrum. If you bring your big toes to touch each other, it'll be a nice reference for your legs so that they don't roll away from each other. Use this bridge moment to really experience some calm in your brain. Let it highlight your chest. So that it accentuates your breathing. Really let your shoulders feel heavy. And this might be the best version for you. So happily stay with it. Or you can soften your knees, walk your feet over to one side, and tumble off. Once you've done that, move your bolster out of the way. If you're staying there, happily stay that way. And then use your blanket. And it can even be this same thickness that you've been working with, to take bridge with a little bit more action. So the blanket is there to support your shoulders so you don't crunch into your neck. And then as you lift your hips and let your shoulders narrow together, your fingers can come toward your heels. You can take your index and middle fingers underneath your heels, kind of like paperweights on your fingers, or you can interlace your fingers. Narrow your shoulders some more. Let your hips lift, so there will be some glute firing, but try not to squeeze to the point of turning your toes out or splaying your thighs. Keep that parallel shape so that you keep some space in your back. And when you find the lift that you're looking for, you can soften your glute action and focus on how broad and wide and open your chest is. Taking the passive and turning it into action. taking the experience that you find by having a lot of support, what you get in your body, what kind of information that gives you, and then using that to your benefit when you turn it into the active, more yang version of the pose. The whole practice of yin and yang, letting the two find balance in each other. Good, and then slowly soften and release. Move your legs side to side, let your head release. Roll to your side to clear your prop away. And then you can stretch out onto your back and take rest. Here's a moment where you can let your feet go. You can turn your palms open. Let your body sink. Forget about your breath. Forget about alignment. Find the place where you can settle. The place where you can really surrender. You can always stay as long as you like in Shavasana. You can always stop the video and finish your practice on your own. Forget the world for a moment. And then when you're ready, take a deeper, fuller breath back into your body. Move and wiggle. Bend your knees. You can draw your legs in enough to grab hold and rock and roll. Find a seat. Bring your hands into your heart. We are one life, we are one light, and we are one love. I bow, as always, with gratitude to you and the light we share. Thanks for tuning in. If you get value out of videos like these, please consider subscribing. That and hitting the like button both really help to grow the channel. If you're so inclined and you're able to, there are also links in the descriptions where you can make donations. While yoga studios continue to be closed, every little bit helps. See you next time.